stand in our way, and our golden age has just begun.
This is Human Events with Jack Posobiec.
Now it's time for everyone to understand what America First truly means.
Welcome to the Second American Revolution.
All right, folks, we're back here. Human Events Daily, Real America's Voice, Jack Posobiec. And folks, let me ask you a question. Have you noticed that flavor has seemingly been stolen from our country? It's true. Because somewhere along the way, we traded real flavor for seed oils and processed junk. Well, it's time to take back our kitchens. Let me tell you something. Our new partners at Steak-N-Shake are here to help. We're introducing Steak-N-Shake's 100% pure beef tallow. No chemicals, no fillers. Just premium beef fat, rendered the old-fashioned way, the way that my Polish grandparents cooked. Right now, they have two options that you can choose from, both at steakandshake.com. That's Steak and Shake with the letter N. That's their grass-fed beef tallow. You're going to love that. That's $9 a jar. But if you want to go a little bit more premium, you got the American Wagyu beef tallow, $12 a jar, and with a rich, buttery taste that you're absolutely going to love. Now, if you want, bundle them both, $19.99, revolutionize your cooking. Fry the crispiest fries, sear the perfect steak, roast vegetables bursting with real flavor. This is how food should taste. Bring tradition and taste back to your table with Steak and Shake Beef Tallow. Order it now at steakandshake.com. That's Steak and Shake, and you know it's got the letter N. steakandshake.com. You're going to love their beef tallow. Now, we've been talking about the rise of political violence, particularly from the left. And we've also been talking about left-wing networked violence. Participated in a White House panel discussion, a roundtable on that. But there was one man who I believe, there's a lot of people who could have been there and should have been there, et cetera. But there's one man that I definitely wanted in that room, and though he wasn't there that day, I wanted to kind of pick his brain on this because he's an absolute expert on the networks, on the money, on connecting the dots, and his name is Mike Benz. He joins us now. What's up, Mike?
How you doing, Jack? Great to see you.
So, Benz, we spent a lot of time while we were in there talking about, for my part, I talked about how the violence is getting worse, how we see these tactics moving now more towards assassinations as opposed to the traditional black bloc protests or the violence against, a random Starbucks or random cars, that type of thing. We're now seeing more and more targeted violence, including asymmetric threats such as assassinations. I even went on CNN and walked them through this. I'm not sure if they understood, but I tried to do what I could to explain it to CNN. But, Benz, when we hear the response from these types, they say, well, Antifa is decentralized. There's no network there. That's just a group of people organically fighting fascism. Is that true?
Not even in the slightest. Go to any one of these Antifa websites, although they're getting rarer and rarer as so many of them are starting to shut down right now to try to hide their own secrets. But they all have .org as their websites. The Portland Antifa site is a .org. The Torch Antifa site is a .org. The Seattle cell is a .org. Jack, what is org short for?
Well, that's short for organization, or specifically nonprofit organization.
Yes, these are organized organizations. This is not some ethereal, metaphysical idea. They are organized organizations, and they operate through a cluster cell network, which is the part and parcel of how we do influence operations abroad. And this kind of gets to the broader Antifa story. Antifa is an international network, and one way to understand it and to try to depoliticize it a little bit for a second here, there were very radical, right-wing, decentralized cluster cells of networks for political influence operations and brass knuckles, breaking up meetings, acts of domestic terrorism that were conducted in the 20th century under what's known today as Operation Gladio. This was a NATO network of stay-behind groups, paramilitary street militias in Italy, in Central and Eastern Europe. There were dozens of these cluster cells that were organized in a decentralized fashion where it brought together basically captains of industry, government regulators, international aid organizations, and then violent political, at the time, right-wing anti-communist forces that were secretly working with the Central Intelligence Agency and NATO's political affairs units in order to nudge domestic politics country by country in the emerging soup of the democratic turbulence post-World War II from the 1940s to the early 1990s. And this was done because we were fighting a Cold War against international communism, and these stay-behind networks, which were licensed to do dirty work and were on the ground, in the streets, were essentially sanctioned by U.S. and NATO intelligence to do a Department of Dirty Tricks of violent activities often in order to stop the emergence of left-wing communism. I believe the best way to understand Antifa and its various connective tissues at the foundation level, at the nonprofit level, and at the U.S. government level is as a left-wing counter-populist faction organized with a very similar structure and for a very similar purpose that the right-wing anti-communist cluster cells were set up internationally during the Cold War. The difference is the American people have not known until just the past few years that this type of structure even existed, or that we were even in a kind of second Cold War against international Trumpism in the way that there was an initial Cold War against international communism.
And so you've got these leave-behind networks. You've got them bounced out. And by the way, and you and I have talked about this, that's exactly what I told the president when I was in the room. I pointed out that all of this goes back to World War II. It even predates World War II. If you look at the way that Antifa was used as the international arm of the Bolsheviks to destabilize countries like revolutionary Spain and like the Weimar Republic. And certainly we all saw what the destabilization of the Weimar Republic turned into if you go back to the 1920s, 1930s. But it was always meant to be the international arm of the revolution, funded by the Russian people, funded by looting the Russian treasury. And so you fast forward that to the Cold War era, and they were using it for the exact same thing. So when President Trump brought up that question, should they be designated a foreign terrorist organization, you'll notice that I was the first one. I said, yes, Mr. President, absolutely. They have networks all across Western Europe. And in fact, people are looking at it a little bit backwards if they think that Antifa started here. No, no, no. Antifa started in Western and Eastern Europe and then came to the United States, not the other way around. That's why these leave-behind networks are so important, and that's the way they were set up in the very first instance.
That's exactly right, and it's a seamless interchange. As
Yes.
you've covered, Mark Bray is the Antifa professor at, I believe, Rutgers, and then as soon as he feels he's running into legal trouble, tries to flee to Spain to join up with cluster networks there. And there is this kind of, I think Michael Lowenthal, another Antifa professor and organizer, described in one of his books, he called it networked clandestiny, this kind of secrecy and this cluster cell organization they refer to as a network of networks. This is the exact same language, by the way, that NATO used during the Integrity Initiative, where they targeted right-wing nationalist forces in Spain. Pedro Baños, famously, his nomination to be the security director, the military head in Spain, was nuked by a clandestine operation by NATO called the Integrity Initiative, of which, according to the documents, both Anne Applebaum and Nina Jankowicz were a part of. They were part of the UK intercluster cell of this NATO-funded secret influence network. And if you look country by country in Europe and around the world, it is impossible to disentangle the goals of Antifa and the goals of the Joe Biden, Barack Obama, CIA, State Department, and USAID. Look at, for example, what Antifa does in Germany, targeting the AfD party, the right-wing populist party there. Look at what they do in Spain, targeting the Vox party. Look at what they do in France, targeting Marine Le Pen. Look at what they do in Brazil, targeting Bolsonaro. Look at what they do in Belarus, targeting Lukashenko. It is impossible to see a lick of daylight between the foreign policy goals of the Central Intelligence Agency under Joe Biden and Barack Obama, and the on-the-ground domestic political actions of Antifa as a kind of street muscle. It's all the way down to the to the commercial investments of the political donors to the DNC. As George Soros and Bill Gates and Tom Steyer and Al Gore and all of these billionaires with multi-billion-dollar assets under investment management funds are promoting things like climate change and shifting profits within the global energy market to portfolio companies that require government mandates to wean off of fossil fuels and into renewables or ethanol-based fuels. George Soros and Al Gore and Tom Steyer and this entire DNC investor class are pre-invested in those markets, while Antifa serves as an eco-fascist battering ram to promote those stocks. The same thing in the public health space. Look at how Antifa breaks up anti-vaccine protests. They're the paramilitary arm of Pfizer.
Exactly. And they don't even realize it half the time because they aren't in that part of the cluster. We're coming up on a quick break, but I just want to point out that not only did Mark Bray head over to Spain, seamlessly integrate with Spanish anarchists, which exactly what we saw during the Spanish Civil War, he's publicly identified himself as part of the Black Rose Anarchist Federation. He stated this, and he stated that he participated in the Hamburg attack on the G20, where they were burning cars, and he specifically talked about how he was targeting luxury vehicles to make sure they didn't burn any working class cars, only wanted to target those of the wealthy. Again, this is a guy who's now Dr. Antifa, who's taking a taxpayer-funded vacation to Spain. We'll be right back. Jack Posobiec, Mike Benz, Human Events.